Millionaire finds that maid Filipina is taking care of his mother with Alzheimer, and he can't believe it. The security camera caught everything, and what Richard Caldwell saw on the monitor made him completely paralyzed. It was 3 a.m. when the mansion's alarm system fired on his mother's room, Margaret. Richard ran to check the cameras, hoping to find some technical problem, or perhaps another violent episode of advanced dementia that plagued his mother 2 years ago. Instead, she found Rosa Mendoza, the 45-year-old maid, sitting next to her mother's bed, gently holding her hand as she sang a lullaby in Tagalog. Margaret Caldwell, 78, was smiling for the first time in months. Richard rubbed his eyes, thinking he was seeing things. His mother, who shouted and struggled violently whenever someone approached, now looked like a child at peace in the arms of a loving mother. Over the past 2 years, taking care of Margaret had become a financial and emotional nightmare. 3 specialized caregivers, all with renowned diplomas and 5-digit wages, had already resigned. The last one had gone in tears after Margaret broke her arm during an episode of uncontrolled fury. "What the hell is she doing there?" Richard muttered, adjusting the camera zoom. Rosa had arrived at the mansion just 2 weeks ago, hired exclusively through an agency for basic household chores. Its function was clear: cleaning the house, preparing simple meals, and definitely not to interfere with your mother's specialized medical care. Richard had always been pragmatic with household employees. He paid above the market, had a strict professional distance, and hoped that each one would fulfill his job without creating unnecessary emotional bonds. Rosa was no different, another immigrant who needed jobs, without special qualifications and basic cleaning references. The camera captured another impossible moment. His mother, who had not pronounced coherent words for weeks, whispered something clearly to Rosa. The Philippine nodded comprehensively, as if perfectly understood each word, and began to gently massage the tense shoulders of the elderly with accurate, almost medical movements. Richard felt something strange squeeze his chest, a mixture of confusion and something he couldn't name. For years, he had spent fortunes on renowned neurologists, private clinics in Switzerland, experimental treatments that cost more than whole houses. Nothing worked. Margaret just got worse, becoming more aggressive and distant every day. As an ordinary maid without medical background or special certifications, did you get in minutes what the best experts in the country could not get in months? And why was she doing this voluntarily, in her own rest time, without receiving absolutely extra for it? As she watched Rosa help her mother settle back in bed with the delicacy of an experienced nurse, Richard realized something in her gestures that revealed much more than a simple employee fulfilling orders. There was a natural familiarity there, an intimate knowledge about dementia that transcended any basic training. Rosa whispered something in English to Margaret, who responded with a radiant smile before closing her eyes peacefully. Richard had not seen his mother sleep so quiet since before the diagnosis. For a moment, Richard wondered if he should interrupt that scene. Technically, Rosa was violating her specific instructions not to interact with her mother, but something in Margaret's serene expression made him hesitate, creating a disturbing curiosity about the secrets that simple woman carried. If you are enjoying this unexpected compassion story, be sure to subscribe to the channel, because what Richard will find out about Rosa in the next few hours will completely change his perspective on who really deserves respect and recognition in his own home, revealing a past he could never imagine. The next morning, Richard arrived early at the office, but his mind was still fixed on the security camera images. During Caldwell Industries' board meeting, he could barely focus on the quarterly reports while thinking of his mother's face on the face for the first time in 2 years. Upon returning to the mansion in the late afternoon, he met Rosa silently organizing the library, as if nothing extraordinary had happened the night before. She greeted him politely in basic English, with the same reserved smile as usual, and continued her work without lifting suspicions. "How was the day with my mother?" Richard asked casually, watching every reaction of Rose as she carefully folds some old books. "Margaret is very quiet today, sir. He ate well, took medicine without problems," replied Rosa, avoiding prolonged eye contact. Something in the way she said, "Mrs." Margaret sounded different, almost too affectionate to an employee who had theoretically interacted with the elderly only during her basic cleaning tasks. Richard went up to check his mother and found something that left him speechless. Margaret was sitting quietly in the armchair near the window, flipping through an old photo album, something she hadn't done for over a year. His hands did not train violently as usual, and his eyes seemed more focused, almost lucid. "How are you feeling today, Mom?" Richard asked, approaching cautiously. Margaret looked at him with a momentary clarity that completely surprised him. "She's special, Richard," said her mother, vaguely pointing toward the door. "Take care of me as my own mother I took care of when I was little." The phrase came out clear and coherent without the usual mental confusion of recent months. Richard felt a shiver on his spine. His mother had not spoken complete and consistent phrases since last Christmas. How had Rose to get this improvement in just a few weeks when Boston's best neurologists had completely failed? That night, he stretched strategically in the office with a direct view of the security monitor, pretending to review contracts while waiting. At 2:30 a.m., Rosa appeared again in her mother's room, this time carrying a small leather bag that Richard had not noticed the night before. The high-definition camera captured Pink by removing some objects that seemed highly specialized: a small bottle of transparent liquid, special ergonomic pillows, an electronic device that she discreetly connected to the outlet by the bed, and even some documents she consulted quickly before storing them again. Her movements were accurate, almost scientific, as if she followed an established medical protocol. Richard recognized some of the equipment, similar to those he had seen in dementia-specialized private clinics, equipment that cost thousands of dollars and required specific training for operation. Margaret was awake again, this time visibly agitated and murmuring incomprehensible words. Rosa approached calmly, whispered something in Tagalog with an almost maternal intonation, and the elderly relaxed immediately, as if those words were a key that opened a door of tranquility in her confused mind. Then the Philippine began a routine that had clearly been practiced many times before: specific exercises for Margaret's arms, therapeutic massage at the exact point of tension that Richard knew how to be problematic, and careful application of the bottle liquid in the patient's temples using precise circular movements. Richard felt a mixture of fascination and growing unbelief. Rosa was not just comforting her mother. She was applying highly specialized therapeutic techniques that he recognized from the expensive experimental treatments they had attempted to clinics in California and Switzerland. How did a common maid know about advanced sensory stimulation for patients with degenerative dementia? The most disturbing was the natural familiarity with which Margaret responded to every gesture of Pink, as if that routine were not only known, but deeply expected and desired. There was an emotional connection there that transcended any professional relationship that could have developed in 2 weeks. Around 4 a.m., Rosa helped Margaret return to bed with the delicacy of a specialized nurse and remained sitting next to her, holding her hand until the elderly woman fell asleep in full peace. Before leaving, she gently kissed Margaret's forehead and whispered something that sounded like a loving prayer in Tagalog. Richard realized that he was witnessing something much more complex and mysterious than simple goodness of a compassionate employee. Rosa had specific medical knowledge about advanced dementia, expensive private therapeutic equipment, and especially an emotional connection with her mother, who seemed absolutely impossible to have developed naturally in just 2 weeks of basic homework. As she watched, Rosa watched her equipment meticulously keep her equipment before she silently returned to her quarters. An unsettling and almost obsessive question echoed in Richard's mind. Who was really that seemingly simple woman? Because she was dedicating her own nights to the highly specialized care of a patient who was supposedly barely new, and especially where she had gotten medical resources and technical knowledge that she did not even know. Did they exist in the market? Richard spent the next few days discreetly observing each Rose movement around the house, looking for clues about his true identity. During meals, he noted how she instinctively prepared specific dishes for patients with swallowing difficulties: soft textures, proper temperatures, small portions that facilitated her mother's digestion. On Thursday, while Rosa organized the pantry, Richard pretended to work on the laptop near the kitchen and listened to her talking on the phone in Tagalog. Although I didn't understand the words, the tone was clearly professional, almost as if reporting a patient's progress to someone. "Rosa, can I ask where you learned to take care of older people so well?" he questioned Richard casually when she finished the call. "My grandmother had similar problems, sir," replied Rosa quickly, but something in her eyes suggested that there was much more behind that simple answer. That afternoon, Richard decided to take a more direct attitude. He waited Pink to go out for her weekly purchases and climbed the small room at the back of the mansion where she slept. He did not intend to scour his belongings, just understand who was that mysterious woman. What he found made him completely perplexed. Carefully hidden under the mattress, there were several medical certificates in English and Tagalog: specialization in geriatric nursing, advanced dementia care course, certification in physiotherapy for the elderly, and even a diploma from a university in Philippines in health sciences. Even more intriguing were the personal letters he found in a small wooden box. One of them, written in English with trembling handwriting, said, "Dear Rose, I can't express my gratitude for taking care of Mom so much lovingly during her last months. She spoke of you as if it were her own daughter." Richard felt a knot in his throat when he realized that this was not the first time Rosa took care of someone with dementia. There were at least 5 similar letters, all of families thanking for the expert care she had given to her loved ones. An even more surprising discovery was waiting for him: an official letter from a private clinic in Boston offering the Rose a job as a salary nursing supervisor 3 times higher than he paid. The letter was dated 2 weeks before she accepted the work as a maid in her home. Why would she refuse a much better job to work here as a maid? Richard muttered, rereading the job proposal. It made no sense. That night he positioned himself again to observe the knight's night routine, but this time with a completely different perspective. When she appeared in her mother's room at 2:30 a.m., Richard no longer saw a maid violating her orders, via a specialized nurse voluntarily dedicating her free time to apply treatments she clearly dominated with mastery. The Tagal conversation between Rosa and Margaret also gained new meaning. Her mother responded in simple English, but there was a fluidity in communication that suggested that this interaction had happened longer than the 2 official working weeks of Rosa. Mother seems to know her much longer, reflected Richard, observing the naturalness with which Margaret accepted the specialized pink care. How is this possible? On Friday morning, Richard made a decision that would change everything. He called the job agency that he had nominated Rose and asked more specific questions about his professional history. "Mr. Caldwell, is there a problem with the employee?" asked the agency's coordinator, Mrs. Patterson. "Not exactly a problem," replied Richard, "but I would like to better understand your previous experience. You mentioned that she worked with home cleaning, but—" "Oh, sir," interrupted Mrs. Patterson, looking surprised. "There was some misunderstanding. Rosa Mendoza is a nurse specializing in geriatrics. She specifically asked for a job as a maid because she wanted to be close to patients with dementia." He said he had important personal motives. Richard's world collapsed at that moment. Rosa was a highly qualified professional who had deliberately disguised as a maid to work at her home. The question that hammered in his mind was disturbing. Why would a dementia nurse specifically choose to work at his home, secretly taking care of his mother, accepting a much smaller salary, and hiding his true qualifications? As she watched Rosa help her mother have breakfast with the patience and technique of an experienced professional, Richard realized that she was facing a much deeper mystery than she had imagined, and that the answer could reveal secrets about her own, family that he had never suspected to exist. Richard confronted Rosa the next day during breakfast, when his mother still slept quietly. After one of the best nights she had in months, he placed the medical certificates on the kitchen table and watched Rosa's expression change completely as she saw them. "So, a pink nurse," said Richard, crossing his arms. "I would like to explain to me why a qualified professional is pretending to be a maid in my home." Rosa sighed deeply, his hands shaking slightly as he kept the documents. "Mr. Caldwell, I can explain everything, but first need to know the truth about your mother and about me." "I'm listening," Richard said, sitting in front of him with a mixture of curiosity and growing apprehension. 3 years ago, I took care of a patient in the Philippines named Elena Santos. She was American, lived there decades after marrying my uncle. During her last months with Alzheimer's, she talked constantly about her son Richard and how she regretted having never had the courage to tell the truth. Richard felt the blood freeze in his veins. "What's true?" Rosa removed an old photo of her wallet. A young girl, 20-year-old blonde, smiling next to a Philippine man. Elena Santos was once Elena Margaret Caldwell. Her mother had a daughter when she was very young, before marrying her father. This daughter was my mother, Lucia. Richard's world collapsed at that moment. "You are saying that—" "I'm your niece, Richard. Margaret is my biological grandmother." Rosa got up and brought a small box that contained dozens of handwritten cards. "Elena left everything documented to me before she died. As she never had the courage to tell the truth, she asked me to come to the United States to find you and our grandmother." Richard took one of the cards with trembling hands. Calligraphy was unmistakably from your mother, but decades ago. "My dear pink granddaughter, if you are reading it means Elena finally found peace. I hope you know Richard one day and that they can take care of each other as a family should do." "Why didn't you tell me immediately when you arrived here?" Richard asked, his voice loaded with emotion. "Because I wanted to make sure you were a good person first," replied Rosa honestly. "Elena told me that Richard was successful, but also that she had become distant and cold after Grandma's Alzheimer's diagnosis. She needed to know if you deserved to know the truth." Richard recalled every moment when he had been impatient with his mother, every time he had outsourced his care instead of being present, all the expensive experts who had hired to avoid the emotional work of personally caring for her. "And the job at the Boston clinic you refused?" "I refused because I found you," said Rosa, your tears finally appearing. "The family is more important than money. Grandma Margaret needs love and specialized care, not paid employees who don't really care about her." At that moment, Margaret appeared in the kitchen, backed by his cane, but walking more firmly than Richard had seen in a long time. "Rosa, honey, why are you crying?" "Grandma," said Pink gently, told the truth to Richard. Margaret looked at her son with sudden clarity that surprised him. "Richard, this is Pink, the granddaughter you never knew. She came from far away to take care of both of us." Richard looked at Rosa, his niece, a specialized nurse who had crossed the world to secretly take care of his grandmother, accepting to be treated as a maid only to be close to the family he had never known. "Why did you test me instead of just telling me?" Richard asked, still processing all revelations. "Because you needed to see if you were able to recognize true value when he appeared in your life," replied Rosa, with a wisdom that transcended his age. "Grandma Margaret taught me through the letters that the true character of a person reveals himself in how he deals with those he considers smaller." Richard realized that he had failed miserably in the test. She had treated Rosa as a replaceable employee, never worrying about meeting her as a person, while she devoted her nights to her mother's loving care without waiting for recognition. As she watched Rosa embrace Margaret with the tenderness of a true granddaughter, Richard understood that the greatest wealth of her life was not in her bank accounts or properties, but in the family that had almost lost by her own arrogance and prejudice, and that the true value of a person could never be measured by the work she does, but by the love she carries in her heart. 3 months later, the Caldwell mansion had completely transformed. The sound of frequent laughs and warm conversations echoed through the corridors that were previously dominated by the heavy silence of disease and isolation. Margaret now spent his days in the living room, flipping through family albums with Rosa, telling stories about Elena and her youth in the Philippines that Richard had never listened to. "Grandma has always been stubborn and determined," said Rosa, organizing Margaret's medications with the accuracy of an experienced nurse, but now with the genuine affection of a dedicated granddaughter. "Elena told me that when Grandma was young, she crossed 3 states alone to find work and support her family after my grandfather died, so I knew she would survive any storm, including this disease." Richard had made a radical decision that surprised all his partners. He resigned from 2 of his most profitable executive positions to spend more time at home with his newly discovered family. He found that managing multinational companies was simple compared to the emotional complexity of reconstructing family relationships that had been neglected and fragmented by decades of wrong priorities. "Rosa, I need to ask you forgiveness every day for the rest of my life," Richard said on Sunday afternoon as they watched Margaret play in the retired garden with Miguel, the 8-year-old son who had come to visit them from the United States after gaining their family meeting visa. "I treated you as a disposable maid when you should have treated it as the precious family you have always been from the first day. You didn't know the truth about our connection," Pink answered patiently, smiling as he adjusted the colorful blanket on Margaret's shoulders. "But now you know, and that's what really matters. Grandma always said that the past teaches, but the present is where we build the future." The most impressive and almost miraculous transformation had happened to Margaret. Her violent episodes practically completely disappeared, her communication significantly improved every week, and she even began to recognize people, places, and events that surprised doctors. His neurologist was completely puzzled by the inexplicable improvement, but Richard and Rosa knew that true love and family care have therapeutic properties that no expensive medicine can replicate. "Do you know what was the exact moment you knew you were a good person for real?" Rosa asked Richard during Sunday dinner, a family tradition they had established. "When did you finally discover who I was and forgave me?" "No," replied Pink, carefully cutting Margaret's food into small, soft pieces. "It was the first night I saw you in the security cameras, watching Grandma sleep in peace after I took care of her. Her silent tears told me everything about her true heart." Richard remembered that transformative moment, when he painfully realized that he had outsourced the unconditional love that his mother deserved, paying strange professional to do what he should have done personally, with his own hands and his own heart. "Rosa refused an incredible promotion for nursing boss at the Boston clinic last week," said Margaret suddenly, and Luclai, surprising both with her crystal-clear clarity. "He said he prefers to take care of his family than earning money elsewhere." "Is that true?" Richard asked, looking at Rosa with increasing admiration and gratitude. "Family always comes first, no matter the circumstances," replied Rosa, with the deep simplicity that characterized her wisdom. "Grandma Margaret has a few precious years ahead. I want every day to be special and memorable to her, not just clinically correctly or financially profitable." Richard realized with emotion that Rosa had deliberately refused exceptional professional opportunities and much superior salaries to dedicate herself to the loving care of a grandmother who had known only through ancient letters, crossing oceans, cultures, and continents to honor a sacred promise made to a dying mother on foreign land. The following week, Richard made a proposal that would change everything forever and would officialize what was already reality in his hearts. "Rosa, I want you to be officially the specialized supervisor of family care of this house. with a salary equivalent to what the Boston Clinic has offered, more full health benefits for you and your whole family in the Philippines, including university education for Miguel. Richard, you don't have to. Yes, I need and more than you think, interrupted Richard, visibly thrilled. You taught me the most valuable lesson of my life, that the true value of a person is not in the diploma he has, the money he earns, or the work he does, but in his genuine youth that demonstrates when no one is observing or recognizing. As she watched Rosa embrace Margaret with tears of gratitude and joy in her eyes, Richard deeply understood that she had learned the most important and transformative lesson of all her existence. Sometimes, life's greatest riches appear humbly disguised as simplicity, and the most valuable people in the world are those who love unconditionally, carelessly care, and are silently, without even acknowledgement, reward, or even waiting for recognition, reward applause. Margaret smiled radiantly at both momentary lucidity, allowing him to say something that has played deeply and forever their hearts. Now we are finally a complete family, united by the true love that transcends borders, prejudice, and differences. Richard looked around the room full of laughter, old photographs and memories being rebuilt, and realized that true wealth had never been in his millionaire bank accounts, but in the family that had almost lost forever for his own arrogance, prejudice, and inability to recognize true value when he appeared disguised as simplicity. If you have been deeply thrilled by this touching story about family, prejudice, and the vital importance of recognizing the true value of people regardless of their origin or social position, be sure to subscribe to more stories that prove that sometimes the greatest lessons of life come exactly from those we least expect, and that genuine compassion do not know borders, nationalities, social differences, or limitations imposed by our own ignorance.